The year was 1885. The place was Rock Springs, Wyoming territory. A terrible event unfolded here. It became known as the Rock Springs Massacre. This was a dark day in American history. It spoke of deep troubles in a growing nation. The echoes of that violence still reach us today. We must remember what happened. We must understand why it happened. Miners had come to Wyoming seeking work. They came from Europe. They came from China. They all sought a better life. But fear and prejudice grew strong. Economic hardship fueled anger. The dream of a new start became a nightmare. Many Chinese miners lost their lives. Their homes were destroyed. Their community was shattered by brutal force. We will look at the forces at play. We will examine the lives of the miners. The story of Rock Springs is complex. It reveals much about America in the late 19th century. The voices from Rock Springs deserve to be heard. Please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more historical content. Rock Springs, Wyoming, was a frontier town. It sat on a high, arid plain. The land was harsh and unforgiving, yet beneath the ground lay treasure. This treasure was coal, often called black diamonds. The town owed its very existence to these coal seams. The Union Pacific Railroad needed this coal. It fueled the locomotives driving westward expansion. Rock Springs was born from this need. It was a vital link in America's growth. The Union Pacific Coal Company was powerful. It controlled the mines in Rock Springs. It also controlled much of the town. Many miners lived in company housing. They shopped at the company store. The company's influence was everywhere. Coal was king in Rock Springs. The fortunes of the town rose and fell with the demand for it. The railroad's hunger for fuel was insatiable. This put constant pressure on the mines and the men who worked them. Working in the coal mines was incredibly dangerous. Tunnels were dark and often unstable. Explosions from gas or coal dust were a constant threat. Roof collapses could bury men alive. The air was thick with coal dust. This led to lung diseases. Miners faced death or injury every single day. They worked long hours for modest pay. Their labor was essential. Two main groups toiled in the Rock Springs mines. There were white miners, mostly immigrants from Europe. Many came from England, Wales, Ireland, and Scandinavia. Then there were the Chinese miners. The Union Pacific first hired Chinese laborers in 1875. This happened after white miners went on strike. The company brought in Chinese workers to replace them. This decision planted seeds of resentment. It created a deep rift from the very beginning. A key issue was wages. Chinese miners were generally paid less than white miners. This was a deliberate company policy. White miners saw this as unfair competition. They feared the Chinese workers would drive down all wages. They worried about losing their jobs to cheaper labor. This economic anxiety was a powerful force. It fueled anger and suspicion toward the Chinese. The company benefited from this division. It helped keep labor costs low. The Chinese miners lived apart from the white community. They resided in an area known as Chinatown or China Camp. It was located on the outskirts of Rock Springs. This separation deepened the divide. In 1882, the United States Congress passed a significant law. It was called the Chinese Exclusion Act. This law specifically targeted Chinese immigrants. It banned Chinese laborers from entering the country for 10 years. It also prevented Chinese immigrants already in America from becoming citizens. This was the first major law restricting immigration of a specific ethnic group. It marked a turning point in American immigration policy. It cast a long, dark shadow. Anti-Chinese sentiment had been growing for decades. This was especially true in western states like California. Economic downturns often led to scapegoating. Chinese immigrants were blamed for taking jobs. They were accused of lowering wages. Racial prejudice was also rampant. Cartoons and newspapers depicted Chinese people in derogatory ways. Politicians fanned the flames of this hatred for political gain. The act had a profound impact on Chinese communities in America. It created an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty. Chinese immigrants felt increasingly unwelcome and vulnerable. Section 5. Whispers of Unrest. Labor unions and rising tensions. Labor organizations were growing stronger in the late 19th century. Workers sought to improve their harsh conditions. One prominent group was the Knights of Labor. They aimed for an 8-hour workday. They wanted better wages and safer workplaces. They advocated for the rights of working people. The Knights of Labor gained many members across the country. They represented a powerful new voice for American laborers. Their ideals were noble. However, the Knights of Labor had a complicated stance on Chinese workers. Many local chapters, especially in the West, saw Chinese labor as a threat. They believed Chinese workers undermined efforts to unionize. They thought they depressed wages for white workers. The national leadership sometimes echoed these sentiments. The Knights of Labor actively campaigned for Chinese exclusion. This position put them in direct conflict with Chinese communities. It fueled anti-Chinese agitation. In Rock Springs, tensions escalated throughout the summer of 1885. The local chapter of the Knights of Labor was active. They held meetings and rallies. Their primary demand was the removal of all Chinese miners from Rock Springs. They pressured the Union Pacific Coal Company. Section 6. The Day the Flames Rose. September 2nd, 1885. The morning of September 2nd, 1885 began like many others. Miners went to their assigned work areas, but trouble was brewing in mine number 6. A dispute arose between white and Chinese miners. It was about the right to work in a particularly desirable section of the mine. White miners insisted that Chinese miners leave certain rooms. When the Chinese miners refused, the white miners walked out. This seemingly small conflict was the trigger. It unleashed years of pent-up anger. Soon, a mob of white miners formed. Many were armed with rifles, shotguns, and clubs. They numbered around 150 men. They marched from the coal mines towards Rock Springs, Chinatown. Their intentions were clear and violent. They were determined to drive the Chinese out. The Chinese miners were largely defenseless. They were outnumbered and taken by surprise. Panic spread quickly through their community. There was nowhere safe to hide. The mob descended upon Chinatown with brutal force. They began shooting indiscriminately. Chinese miners were attacked and beaten. Some were killed instantly. The rioters then turned to property. They looted homes and businesses. Then they set the buildings on fire. Flames engulfed Chinatown. The scene was one of chaos and terror. Section 7. Order restored, justice denied, the Army's arrival and legal failures. When the violence subsided, Chinatown was a smoldering ruin. The bodies of the slain lay among the ashes. Survivors were scattered, terrified, and destitute. The local authorities did little to stop the mob. They seemed unwilling or unable to control the situation. The white community largely supported the rioters' actions, or they were too intimidated to speak out against them. A grim silence fell over Rock Springs. The extent of the devastation became clear. Several days later, United States Army troops arrived. They were dispatched by President Grover Cleveland. Their mission was to restore order. They were also there to protect the property of the Union Pacific, and eventually to escort surviving Chinese miners back to Rock Springs. The presence of the soldiers brought a tense calm to the town, but the underlying hatred remained. The soldiers set up camp. They became a fixture in Rock Springs for years to come. Some arrests were made in connection with the massacre. 16 white miners, including members of the Knights of Labor, were charged. A grand jury was convened in Green River. Evidence was presented. Eyewitnesses, including some Chinese survivors, testified. However, the outcome was a travesty of justice. Section 8. Scars and Reparations. The Aftermath and Federal Response. Despite the terror they had endured, many Chinese miners returned to Rock Springs. They came back about a week after the massacre. They returned under the protection of the United States Army. The Union Pacific wanted them back. The company needed their labor to operate the mines. The miners themselves needed work to survive. But life was not the same. They rebuilt a section of Chinatown, but fear and trauma lingered. They lived under constant guard. The Rock Springs Massacre became an international incident. The Chinese government lodged strong protests with the United States. They demanded accountability for the violence. They sought punishment for those responsible. Crucially, they insisted on compensation for the victims. This included payment for lives lost and property destroyed. The Qing dynasty's diplomats pursued the matter vigorously. They highlighted the treaty obligations of the United States to protect Chinese nationals. President Grover Cleveland publicly condemned the massacre. He called it a ghastly story of cowardly murder and brutal assault. Section 9. A Bitter Legacy. Lessons from Rock Springs. The Rock Springs Massacre stands as a brutal chapter in American history. It was a day of horrific violence. At least 28 innocent people were murdered. Many more were injured and lost everything they owned. An entire community was uprooted and burned to the ground. The promise of safety and opportunity turned into a deadly betrayal. The failure to bring any of the perpetrators to justice added another layer of pain. It was a profound injustice. The tragedy was born from a toxic mix of factors. Economic anxieties played a significant role. White miners feared competition for jobs and wages. Racial prejudice against the Chinese was widespread and deeply ingrained. Labor union agitation, while aimed at improving workers' lives, sometimes targeted Chinese immigrants. Failures of leadership at local and company levels allowed tensions to fester. These elements combined to create a climate where such violence became possible. It was a perfect storm of hate. The historical significance of the Rock Springs Massacre is undeniable. It is one of the most violent attacks against Chinese immigrants in United States history. It starkly illustrates the dark side of westward expansion.